In today's webinar, The Changing Landscape of Brand Protection in the Media Industry, we'll be discussing how the brand protection landscape for media companies is evolving beyond just pirated content and what you can do to ensure a healthy and consistent brand experience online. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today's presentation. We are joined by brand protection experts, Trevor Robbins and Amy Dozier. Trevor is a brand protection analyst at MarkMonitor. In addition to implementing brand protection programs for his clients and providing Chinese marketplace guidance, he has also worked closely with MarkMonitor's anti-piracy, training, and strategic services groups. He started his career as a federal worker in Washington, D.C., and applies an international background towards providing innovative and effective IP protection strategies that effectively disrupt illegitimate online activities. Amy is a client services manager for MarkMonitor. Amy supports both brand protection and anti-fraud services across a wide range of industries, from financial services to multinational mass media and information organizations. She has helped develop and manage customized brand protection solutions addressing brand impersonation, false association, affiliate and partner compliance, domain, cyber squatting, web traffic diversion, social media brand abuse, and copyright infringement. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Amy to get us started.
Thanks, Gina. Obviously, anti-piracy is a large component of a brand protection in the media industry, but there are other areas that pose just as much a threat to brand owners, and that's what Trevor and I are going to talk about today. We'll start by highlighting how the entertainment media industry has changed, look at specific areas of risk, and then turn our focus towards how a media organization can build a robust brand protection program. Let's start by looking how the entertainment media industry has changed. So here we have statistics that show the magnitude of the industry. Keep in mind that this number here, the $771 billion projected U.S. media and entertainment market by 2019, that's just a third, that represents a third of the global industry. While these statistics are a bit of a wow factor, I think the staggering message for me is the rate at which this growth is occurring. For example, in 2015, the U.S. market was $603 billion. So to hit that $771 billion in 2019 is going to equate to about a 20% growth, and that is just phenomenal.
Yeah, and certain media channels with video games, for instance, not too long ago that was a niche market, so to see it grow that way, it's pretty surprising.
In the U.S., adults are spending about half of their waking hours consuming media of some sort, whether that be entertainment or for educational purposes. I think it's interesting. Today we see everything from job promotions to video game victories, or even our fitness goals that we've accomplished. We're sharing those on various social platforms. Consumers really are no longer distinguishing between online and offline media. It's really more about the experience. There are so many different ways to consume media. Mobile devices not only have accelerated the rate in which we consume media, they're now a preferred method to access the internet, stream content, and play games. 10 years ago, I never would have thought to watch a movie on my phone, and now it's commonplace. And we're really seeing an overlap between live face-to-face experiences and online experiences. And this overlap is becoming more and more prominent. I think a great example of this is, say you're attending Comic-Con. While you might be there in person, you're probably also streaming content while you're there. You might be sharing your experience on social platforms. Another great example is you might be one of 40,000 people, fans, in a sold-out stadium watching professional video gamers compete for the honor of being the best team of one of the most popular video games in the world. And so we're really seeing this. It's really a change.
Yeah, I actually got to go to Comic-Con a few years ago, and I mean, it's just this huge convention, and what you've got are, studios having separate private screenings, and you've got, video game tournaments and demos, kind of happening everywhere. All these brands lined up with QR codes or ways to sign up and follow for promotions. And then at the same time, there's like a live Q&A panel happening, and everybody's on their cell phone, and, people are navigating this huge space with a purpose-built app just to get around Comic-Con that's keeping you updated on the schedule and letting you know where you're at and different things you can see at that time. So kind of a media overload almost, but you can definitely see how everything is so interconnected in an example like that.
Well, I think for me the point is that the silos between an online and offline experience are quickly disappearing. There's really not that distinction that there used to be.
Yeah, even if you go to see a movie, and even then there's, a connected app, or there's a game with a connected TV show. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Or an after the show, interview session with actors and producers and writers and things like that. It's that you can only access online.
Yeah, exactly.
Online threats can quickly erode an experience for a consumer. These threats can be broken up really into two major categories, virtual and physical threats. We see media companies that are typically focusing their brand protection efforts on pirated digital content, but other threats pose just as much danger to your brand across every form of media. A consumer's negative experience can directly impact the brand owner, and that can happen in many ways. It can be a loss of trust in the brand erosion, or even hitting their bottom line with lost revenue. So let's dig a little deeper into some specific areas of risk. We'll start with virtual threats. So there are several ways in which a fraudster will try and obtain credentials resulting in account takeover or theft, one of which is phishing. And phishing is the attempt, usually through some sort of electronic communication, to obtain sensitive information such as usernames and passwords to take over an account. Oftentimes they're masquerading as a trustworthy source.
So pretty much anything with a login.
Exactly. Anytime you have a login, there's information that you're trying to protect. Some obvious examples might be your bank account, but what about your online shopping account, your account you use for add-ins or add-ons for a video game that you're playing, or even your video streaming account. Really, anytime you have a login, there's some sort of information you're protecting.
Yeah, you could rack up thousands just on any of those accounts alone, because so many of our different accounts are tied to our banks now.
Oh, my credit card is on all of my accounts, right? You get one account and you have my information. So yeah, definitely we have to think about that.
And do you think
everyone's at risk?
Are people becoming more savvy in general?
I think in general they are. We see definitely a lot more consumer-related scams, whether that be a phish attack or, anything that they feel is uncomfortable. They're not as, I think, and not everyone, but I think in general, most consumers are much more savvy than they used to be and are reporting it to the appropriate people. Another, back up just a sec, we'll talk a little bit about malware. So we have malware. Malware is more of an umbrella term that's going to refer to a variety of forms of hostile or intrusive software. This would include computer viruses, ransomware, spyware, things like that, other malicious programs. Then we have social engineering. I probably find social engineering the most interesting because it relies so heavily on the human interaction. We have fraudsters who are not only targeting the average 30-year-old gamer, they're also targeting the 14-year-old that maybe doesn't understand the risks or is going to be more susceptible to online manipulation or threats by someone saying, we're going to shut your account down if you don't provide, specific credentials. And so it's very interesting to see the methods in which they're pursuing this.
And for those who don't know, can you explain ransomware? Because I was thinking just the other day, I came across a website during review, and what it was a page that said that your account has been seized by the FBI, and for $100 I could unlock access to that page. People invest so much in their accounts, whether it be their social media image or their video game character. Malware like that could be devastating to somebody, and it might be pretty tempting to pay to get that content unlocked.
Oh, certainly, especially if there's something that you're wanting. If you feel you're in the process of making a purchase and you get some sort of ransomware or anything that's going to say they're going to lock your account down, even if they're not asking for some sort of financial compensation for unlocking it, I think that's what gets people a lot of times is they just panic. And so they're making decisions that they normally wouldn't because of fear of not being able to do something, whether that's make a purchase or something else. And so people definitely take advantage of that. So we also need to take a look at digital goods theft. And just to explain what we mean by digital goods, we'll talk about what virtual goods are. So virtual goods are non-physical objects and money that has been purchased for online use in communities or online games. Digital goods, on the other hand, is a little bit broader. It's including digital books, music, and movies. The bottom line is, whether it's physical or virtual property, it's still theft. For example, you might be playing a video game where your character has collected special gear or weapons, or you're in a game where you've been mining gold or jewels and have accumulated a significant amount of virtual currency. These virtual goods and achievements have value on the market and can be resold or cashed out via third-party websites and can be worth up to thousands of dollars in some cases.
Yeah, and we see those on marketplaces all the time. Any exchange site where sellers are selling to other sellers or consumers to other consumers, they're marketing that in-game currency as though it were, a very tangible thing, which violates a number of marketplaces' policies, but is also often a violation of the terms of service that they have with the various media subscriptions that they subscribe to.
So Trevor's now going to talk a little bit about physical threats. Trevor, can you start by just explaining what you mean by physical threats?
Yeah, so physical threats in this context, again, our focus today isn't piracy. When I mention hard goods, what I'm referring to are, licensed products, any kind of merchandise associated with a brand or with a property. And there's a lot of different, threats inherent in that community, and there's a lot of brand protection issues that come up that kind of come along with the growth of the space. So the challenges that we're going to go over today, we're going to talk about counterfeit, fan-made goods, which is a huge one, general brand integrity, and licensing and the protection of licensing revenue. So counterfeit, more than ever before, is easily obtained. So you can go online and without much difficulty find cheap reproductions of some of the most popular items. They quickly tend to become components of different types of other goods. So if you've got an iconic symbol that's a part of one of your properties and suddenly it's being mass-produced and then bought and then attached to other items, you kind of have these multiple levels of infringement. And it kind of gets more difficult to go back to the original source in the sale of those counterfeit goods. You have stuff that would otherwise be kind of innocuous, like generally fan-made goods that aren't exactly infringing, but because they've incorporated some of that counterfeit merchandise, suddenly their entire product creates a bigger issue. And the power of being able to 3D print anything, anytime that you want, that's huge, especially when it comes to things like, those iconic symbols or badges. You can make them yourself or, make them to sell. And with that, both the counterfeit and kind of the homemade items, that 3D printing or the use of molds to create certain objects, that also comes with its own health and safety concerns about what material is being used to make these products before they're sold to consumers. Another thing that's difficult about copyright is image abuse. So it makes it difficult to identify counterfeits for both brand owners and consumers. So on these marketplaces where you have sellers, posting what appears to be the same item, but they're all using the same images, which some marketplaces actually allow, it's going to become really difficult to distinguish between them in a way that you can go through them quickly. So having experts who can investigate beyond what might seem obvious, based on the picture, it's really valuable and it's going to be a part of any useful brand protection program. And there's also the nature of the property. So shifting over to fan-made goods, you can merchandise anything, absolutely anything. So whether it's slow-burning crime show or an action-packed series of films or fantasy, the merchandise might be different, but it is going to be out there because you have everything from mugs to hats to reproductions of symbols and whatever media it is. But even something you thought that might kind of be safe from this sort of behavior is not.
Well, I know that for me as a consumer, it's more challenging than ever to confirm an item's authenticity. not only for myself, but especially if I'm buying a gift for someone else from an industry that I'm not familiar with. Maybe I'm not familiar with a specific movie or video game, and so it just becomes more and more challenging really to get to the authentic product that I want to make sure, that I'm getting what I pay for.
Yeah, that's a really good point, trying to kind of purchase in a space that you're not already very familiar with. And you don't expect your consumers, your customers to be brand protection experts or to be able to look for some of those, small indicators that the product might not be legitimate. But ultimately, if they have a bad experience, they're going to correlate that with your brand. So being proactive about dealing with that is very important. And now unmet demand, and I've broken this into real and perceived because both sort of come into play here. There is a gap between available authorized merchandise and what consumers are actively seeking. And that gap, that space, is quickly filled by infringers and fans alike. One of the most common things we'll hear from affected sellers, maybe they've had a marketplace listing taken down, is that you guys don't offer this product, fans want this product, and that's why we're selling it. So you have that group, but you also have smaller subsets of groups as the industry grows who might say, oh, you don't have this sweatshirt in the exact color I want it. And so being in tune with those conversations and being aware of kind of the landscape of your own consumer base is really important. And, having services or engaging with a managed services organization who knows where those conversations are taking place and actively monitoring them can provide some really useful business intelligence that can be, shared within your business beyond your brand protection group. Another issue is that there's no barrier to entry anymore. It's not just a marketplace like Etsy. There are tens of thousands of websites out there for T-shirts alone. And it's ever expanding and becoming more and more challenging to deal with. So if you don't have the ability to have scans running globally and finding all these websites, you're really only scratching the surface if it's something that you're doing like searching organically. So anyone can open an online shop for free. There's no inventory on hand. It's a maker's market. And more choices mean more problems. So the more and more fans or infringers are flooding the market with these different goods, it makes it difficult to keep the right product at the right price. And brands understandably want to expand their product offering and test new items, but with so much noise out there, that can be extremely difficult. And kind of throwing back to the business intelligence that you gain from monitoring and being active with a brand protection program, you have people on the front lines who are auditing your merchandise in a vast e-commerce space and then reporting those results to you. So all of that being said, on a positive note, there are diamonds in the rough. So a couple examples from cases that I've dealt with personally. I've seen apps get licensed because they were cool. I mean, they definitely had a demand for it, and it was something that the brand owner didn't have. So that resulted in a licensing deal. The same goes for spotting maybe a really cool piece of fan-made merchandise, and I've seen that being forwarded to people within the licensing and product departments, and it ends up becoming one of their licensed products. And that also plays into knowing when to act and when not to act. So, everyone wants to avoid an adverse event, but with close monitoring, even if you have something that might fall into the category of a enforcement priority, it is infringing. Being aware if it's trending on social media and has a lot of visibility before taking any action, that's a valuable tool. Now we're going to go over brand integrity in general. So all of these things are much more difficult with growth, as we keep mentioning, with that huge ecosystem that's out there. And it's becoming harder and harder to distinguish brands from each other. And there's sort of this mashup culture where there are so many choices out there. It's more and more difficult for one brand to stand out from the others. So the demand for an authentic experience or authenticity in general is really important here. So we have consumers who are prioritizing experiences over objects. They appear less interested in licensed merchandise with, notable exceptions like collector communities. And you have that sheer volume of licensed merchandise, much of which looks the same. And so people are becoming less brand conscious in general. And that includes licensed products, as I mentioned. And the thing is that objects often enhance or augment the experiences that people are looking for. They feel it makes it more authentic. So that's kind of an opportunity, to still be in that space and produce those sorts of licensed goods. And we have collectors that still want licensed products. I know that, any convention around a genre, whether it's movies or games or any kind of media involved, people want to own part of that experience. I mean, that's why they have the specialty, like popcorn buckets at theaters that you can take with you, or, a necklace with a symbol from the property. People want to use that to enhance their experience. So there always will be that market. And then licensed brands often peak fast and decline quickly. So we see these shorter life cycles usually based around, a title or a property. And we'll get more into that later on, having a custom strategy that kind of accounts for that uniqueness of that life cycle. And then ensuring merchandising compliance can fall to the bottom of their priority list really quickly. And that's for any brand owner. And that means it's up to the brands to ensure compliance by conducting regular audits and making the implementation process easy for retailers. We see this a lot where maybe titles are hitting, they're getting into homes before they've actually been released, or posters are being sold out the back door of a movie theater when there are strict agreements in place to prevent that. And we see it when it ends up on marketplaces. We can then alert the brand owner, and they can, sometimes all it takes is a phone call once you're able to track down, which theater it was to make sure that they're following their agreements. So the overall takeaway from that is, the current challenges faced by licensors and licensees are the very ones faced by all consumer product brands. So we have the uniqueness of kind of the media industry, the entertainment media industry, but these are challenges that, all other consumer product brands face. So having the experience to deal with those issues, and then also having a tailored approach based on the uniqueness of the industry, really puts us in a good position, or any managed services organization, to identify the problem and use best practices to address it. So we find ourselves in a delicate balancing act. So on one hand, we're protecting the interests of licensees and the integrity of the brand, and on the other, you're still not upsetting loyal customers. And so that comes into play, again, when we talk about fan-made goods, brand integrity in general, licensing, and consumer confidence. And we're going to keep going back, or at least referring to this, because walking that thin line between the two can be difficult and challenging, but it's something that we do every day for many of our clients.
So what should a brand owner be thinking about in developing a robust brand protection program? And with that delicate balancing act, it seems like it's not a one-size-fits-all approach to brand protection.
Absolutely. And it's definitely not a cookie-cutter type of brand program. Even though different brand owners have similar business problems, each one is going to be unique, and that requires a custom strategy. But these custom strategies have some key components and similarities. Visibility across the internet is crucial. So when you have multiple channels where abuse is found, we want as many of them being monitored as possible so we can prevent or stop brand abuse happening. And then with an international capability, so both from a scan and coverage standpoint, finding everything that's out there. Also the importance of having a local presence with coverage in multiple languages. If you're only kind of looking in one area because that might be where the bulk of your customers are, you really need to have a global perspective to have a holistic brand protection program that's going to make a lasting impact. And having those local partners and expertise is crucial. And then enforcement. And we added the soft approach, so there's the scale again. How do we walk that line? We know when it's appropriate to, be either stern or a little softer with fans, depending on the brand and depending on the messaging that you want going out to them. And we'll get into a little more detail on that later. And industry-specific expertise in every way, we're your customers in the same way that you're ours. So having resources who truly understand your products and the uniqueness of their product life cycle is extremely valuable. And understanding how things ebb and flow with the popularity of every brand. So the visibility, we're talking about a lot of different things, all these different ways all these different outlets where brand abuse can occur. So the internet is vast. You need technology to locate any of these issues. You're not going to be able to find all of these things by searching yourself, or not in any efficient way. And having coverage across all these likely threat vectors is going to be a core component of your brand protection program for both coverage with detection and enforcement. So these are some of the more common types of abuse we find, but everything from squatted domains and those physical goods on marketplaces to social media, and then back to the fraud that Amy was talking about, phishing emails, harmful mobile apps. That all is, you need to be looking at it all, not just a piece, because if you start seeing any of these problems in one area, it's likely that it's happening everywhere for all these other, outlets, all these other channels.
I think it's important to keep that flexibility approach in mind, to where each one of these areas might have very different approaches. You might have a client might have a very specific website, domain squatting strategy where they take it very seriously, and the enforcement letters are very stern. Whereas a brand owner might take a very different approach to a social media platform, where, like you mentioned earlier, you might have some fans that are just misdirected.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And seeing all the different problems throughout so many different outlets, being flexible with how you're able to respond and having multiple options for every situation is something that is extremely valuable, and it's really important for your program. And having the technology to do so is obviously critical. So there's no good way that you can practically monitor all of this through so many different channels and on a global scale without having technology that gives you full visibility across the internet. So when you can automate this part of collection and analysis, it makes it much easier to then kind of get to the root of the problem and go after your priorities based on your specific business problem. And then also, because we're collecting across the internet globally, there's so much business intelligence from product to product, as far as popularity and the types of items maybe that fans want the most, that you can take from that data. And then along with visibility across internet channels, we briefly talked about international capability. You need coverage that is international in nature. So if you're not looking globally and you don't have visibility into all the potential problems, then you're not going to have an effective program. So having that multinational, multilingual team combined with global visibility puts you in a really strong position to take control of your brand abroad and domestically. So here, back to that scale, distinguishing between a misguided fan or a deliberate brand infringer. So when it comes to the actions of enthusiastic fans, there's a need to handle the situation delicately, because any misstep could result in, maybe a PR disaster. But there are different approaches, again, being flexible, that you can take with the way that you deal with each, and kind of determine if it's a misguided fan who's run afoul of intellectual property laws because it's easy to do, or it's a deliberate infringer who saw an opportunity to profit from the popularity of your brand. So education is one option, and it's been extremely effective, and I think it fulfills a lot of desires that fans have, which is they mostly want a response. So if you take down a marketplace listing or a website, they don't expect a big corporation or a big brand protection agency to respond. But when you do, 99% of the time they're just grateful that someone took the time to reach back out to them, or if they have questions, point them in the right direction. And that's not practical to do when we're talking about global coverage across all marketplaces if you're trying to do it yourself. But if you have a dedicated team and resources and you've set up messaging, you can have it both ways. Kind of you can communicate with every single person that reaches out because of a brand enforcement action. So as far as education goes, for the majority of them, which are misguided fans, not only can you point them towards the policies of the marketplace that they're selling on, which generally state very clearly what you can and cannot do, and almost all of them will have their own section on intellectual property. But at the same time, you're not going so far as to writing out a roadmap for infringers on how to infringe and get away with it. So having consistent messaging and kind of pointing people in the right directions without giving them too much information or anything that could be construed as legal advice is very important, and it is manageable with the right resources in place.
And I think along with the misguided fan education, sometimes it's the brand owner that needs to be educated on what their options are, knowing that they have these different approaches to a problem. It doesn't always have to be hard and fast enforcement where we're threatening legal action. It could be a soft approach, and I think it's important for a brand owner to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, exactly, and especially because so many things more and more fall into this gray area, and when you're kind of in murky waters like that, having those different options to kind of protect yourself is really valuable as well. So with that industry expertise, even with technology, you may not be able to devote the resources necessary to properly handle the problem. And when I say properly handle, I mean having a comprehensive and effective program that's kind of dealing with everything and not just putting out a fire here and putting out a fire there. You need the help of an experienced team with the right connections in the right places. And that has a lot to do with relationships with marketplaces, having been through this process with similar organizations before with similar problems, and then just a wealth of experience and the ability to adapt and create custom plans to meet your needs. So as you can see in that example, between the experience, the connections, a flexible response, there's that specialty workflow where we have different concentration of effort around different points in the product life cycle. So you might want to have most of your time focused on social media as you're trying to create hype around a product release or a title release, but you may want to ramp that down in the interim once the fanfare has kind of died off a bit, and that's when you're starting to see merchandise. Or maybe you need to be focusing on marketplaces and merchandise months ahead of the release so that you have more room to promote your own products. So knowing how to distribute your resources and have them in the right place at the right time is going to be crucial, and is definitely something that's customizable to any business need. So to wrap things up, the landscape has changed with this explosive growth. It's getting different every day. There's more outlets every day. So we hope that we've kind of put out some of the challenges to expect, and at least the challenges that we've been encountering. And threats to your brand online are both physical and virtual. Those silos have kind of merged. There's little distinguishing between the two. That's going to become more and more common. That line is eventually not going to exist, so you can't really address one without addressing the other. And you need a multi-pronged approach for addressing these threats. So that visibility, that is a product of having the right technology, looking for the right things, a global capability, and having local partners and expertise, having brand protection professionals who understand the industry and have dealt with many of these problems before for a variety of clients. And then again, those multiple enforcement options. You may feel pigeonholed as to what you can do about certain types of abuse, but when you partner with a company, you might see that there are so many different ways where you can handle these problems much more efficiently and cost effectively.
Yes, we have some questions come in. So the first one is, what happens when you encounter a misguided fan? How do you know it is a fan versus a hardcore infringer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So generally, it's difficult to determine until they reach out asking about their takedown. And you kind of take every response with a grain of salt, but we look at a lot of different things like seller history, the quantity at which they're selling products, their presence elsewhere on the web. We might see that they have multiple brands that they're selling infringing products for. But I would say that most of the pushback is what we call it, that we receive are genuine fans who are saying, I'm not sure why my listing was taken down or why my marketplace, why my website was taken down. And that's when being able to educate them creates an opportunity for you to point them in the right direction. And, you're able to appreciate them as a fan while also, removing the infringement and, making them or putting them in better shape to not infringe in the future.
Great. So the next question, how do you deal with the cyclical nature and popularity of some titles? For example, some are really big for a long time while others fizzle out.
Yeah, so that comes with having that customized approach. But some things are constant, like Amy, for example, fraud. Fraud is something that's never going to go away. So that's something that we can say is maybe turned on all the time, no matter what stage in the life cycle a brand is in. But for others, you have these franchises that have been around for years and years and years, and that doesn't mean that there's still going to be no ebb or flow in the popularity. So what we have is our ear to the ground, and all that detection and technology, looking globally, kind of gives us a sense of what's popular when and where the issue is. But if you have new titles or releases, they're going to be treated in a similar fashion. It's kind of like we've been through the life cycle so many times. Whether it be short or long, you still have this need to put resources in the right place at the right time. And that kind of is what it comes down to. So whether it be a long-standing brand or, something brand new, you're always going to need to plan ahead and have resources in the right place.
And I think that's a great point on brands that maybe don't have any possibility of fizzling out. There could be, you might want to change your strategy after a certain period of time and continue a monitoring process. I realize that with some games and movies, that fizzle out is definitely a factor, but on some other brands, you may not expect there to be a fizzle out. It's going to be a brand that's going to be around for quite some time, and so, even though you're addressing specific items up front, high priority items, there's also a need for monitoring, continued monitoring and enforcement that will happen throughout the entire brand, not just the life cycle of a specific product.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those brands that have been around for a long time, they're at greater risk for dilution. Just because they've become so, commonly placed, it's really hard for them to distinguish themselves. So, that monitoring is crucial. And then when you're monitoring, of course, that gives you the upper hand if you see an anomaly or changes in behavior that you can use as intelligence to make decisions.
Great. So the next question is, I think the education process is interesting. Can you elaborate on it?
Yeah, so when we talk about the education piece, it's walking that line, again, between kind of pointing a misguided fan in the right direction and not giving infringers like a roadmap. So having consistent, kind of messaging where you're telling the affected party, go to this website or go to this article on infringement and look at the policies of this website here, here, and here to learn more about brand infringement. And we see that fans will teach other fans because we're definitely in tune with, many of the communication channels that they use, whether it be a blog or a discussion. They will take that message with them, and, if they understand why what they're doing resulted in a marketplace takedown, they're far less likely to do it again.
Great, thank you. So we have one more question. We have part of our website dedicated to educating our customers on how to identify and report scams. How does that fit in with your strategy?
I think from the anti-fraud side, so when it comes to phishing attacks, malware, or the social engineering, I think it's important for that to have that education piece in place, because that's what's helping those customers become more savvy and report issues that they maybe wouldn't have realized a few years ago that were a problem. And with the monitoring of, say, an abused inbox or a customer feedback, we're able to take action, near real time and get something shut down, very quickly. Our organization, we have, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week coverage, and so we can get things taken down quicker than maybe a brand owner could if they're working on their own.
All right, great. We actually had a couple more questions come in. How can you properly balance automation, which can save time, while also using a soft, customized approach?
So you can automate as much as you're able to. For instance, that detection piece, having it find the things that have traditionally been a problem or things that could be a threat in the future, being able to monitor that globally and kind of analyzing those results on maybe a listing by listing basis, that can be a huge time saver, because oftentimes the infringement that people become aware of or within a business, it's because it's been bubbled up through a couple of layers that maybe started with an email. And by the time it gets to, someone who may be able to do something about it, you kind of missed your moment. So automated detection is a huge part in how we manage this efficiently. Also, managing all of that correspondence in a single place is huge. And so being able to have that communication with marketplaces and sellers all through the same kind of system in a central place is really valuable.
Great, thanks, Trevor. So one last question. What kind of active role does MarkMonitor play in educating brand owners and understanding the range of options and how they enforce their marks, as opposed to aggressively demanding takedowns or threatening legal action?
Well, I think that's where our industry knowledge really comes into play. Each of our clients is assigned a dedicated client services manager that can help through that process. And so it would, we really take brands on a case-by-case basis. Each one has very unique business problems as well as approaches, and we can use, again, that experience that we've had to help guide brand owners right out of the gate. By giving them the options that they have and letting them know the pros and cons to those options. It's not just knowing what those options are, but what are the benefits to one option versus another. I think it's part of the that kickoff program with any new client, but it's also something that as the business problem could change over time, we're also keeping in regular communication with those brand owners to help educate. As we're seeing something different through the detections, we're seeing something, different business problems might pop up over time.
Yeah, just, as infringement or the landscape is changing all the time, we're constantly finding new ways to remove infringing content from the web, and definitely keeping brand owners apprised of those techniques as, we find and develop them is big as well.
Great. Thank you, Trevor and Amy. So I really appreciate you sharing those best practices with our audience today. I'd also like to thank everyone tuning in for your participation. As a reminder, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the webinar's presentation slides and the recording within the next week. So you can be on the lookout for that email. That concludes our webinar for today. Thanks again for tuning in, and have a great day, everyone.